In this week's episode of The Rag, I was lucky enough to have been joined by Simon LaFosse. Simon is the ex-CEO and chairman, founder of Fosse Associates, a name that many people across the recruitment industry will recognise. What I didn't know was that LaFosse are 12 years old. They are now around or just over 100 million in turnover per annum. They've grown by 35% every single year on average since they started. They've now got 215 staff across London, Leeds, New York, LA and Toronto. Simon is the chairman, and from day one, it's been a co-owned business, meaning he put 40% aside from the very beginning for the staff to own. And despite lawyers and accountants telling him he was crazy, he stuck by it. And I think that was one of the things that he talked about as being a contributing factor in getting to 215 and looking to get to 500 in the future. What a humble, genuine, lovely man. I enjoyed every single minute of this podcast, and I think, again, a brand many people will recognise, but I'm not convinced everyone knows the story. So hopefully this will help so many others and you'll enjoy as much as I did. So without further ado, so Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in. What you don't know, you probably don't even realise, you were due in my head about a week ago.
Oh, okay.
And I got the room ready. I got everyone, because we use a separate company's office for this. I kicked them all out, I had them all working downstairs. And then I was messaging Faye in your marketing team. I was like, where is he? And she's like, Sean, I emailed you about the change of the date. And I was like, oh, crap, you did as well. And I just didn't change the date. So this is round 2 for me, not for you.
Oh, okay.
But I'm delighted to have you in on the podcast.
Thank you.
Obviously, I've done a little intro for you already, but for the listeners' benefit, can you tell us who you are and what you're up to right now?
So Simon LaFosse, and I started a recruitment business about 12 years ago, tech recruitment business, and I am now still working in it full time, but as executive chairman rather than founder. Well, I'm still founder, but not CEO anymore.
Brilliant. I reckon most people, I'm going to put a bet on that most people listening will recognise LaFosse as a brand. I don't think there's that many recruiters that wouldn't know the business.
Well, that's nice to hear.
I think if you recruited into something like healthcare or something, you might not have, but tech, change, professional services, London-based, I think you would probably have seen or heard of the brand. So I'm personally really excited to hear more about the story, and I'm sure the listeners will be. So let's go back. So before you even started the business, what were you up to then?
So I worked for a company called Harvey Nash for 14 years and joined them when they were not much more than a startup.
With David Higgins?
Yeah, David Higgins.
So I met David recently.
Oh, did you? Yeah, he's a legend in the industry.
Yeah.
Started working there as a relatively junior position, grew very much for the company, helped it float and internationalise, and just saw and was part of that growth for that 14 years. We floated on the main market cap at peak was 250 million.
Wow.
So saw quite a roller coaster of a journey and learned a huge amount in that time.
What was your role through that process?
I started off as a recruiter and then I just got promoted into the management team and ended up sitting on the exec team that sat underneath the founders, so helping to run the business. And as I say, just learned a huge amount during that time. It was a real good apprenticeship for me, and also I think importantly was able to see how quickly a business can grow given the right conditions. So I had that. So when people talk to me about how come you've kind of driven this on and on, well, it's like, well, I just grew up in an environment where that was what we did. So
it's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had a similar chat from the Faden group that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago. It was as if that was the normal thing for them. And a lot of people asked like how, but when I spoke to Claire, she was just like, well, this is kind of what we did. Yeah. So you were there for how long? 15 years?
14 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what happened? Was it once the sale went through or the exit went through that? Did you?
No, we floated for a while. The company gone up and down. And there was a recession in 2001, very much a tech recession, which really challenged the business. But the reason I left eventually was I think I just felt I'd done everything there that that was interesting me, and I had a personal philosophy about what made an effective recruitment business, and there comes a point where you've got to try that out yourself if you really believe in it.
Yeah.
And so that was what I did, with a mix of trepidation and excitement.
What year was that?
It was 2007.
Right. So just before.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone I speak to as well started their business around that time. And well, salute, hats off to all of you.
Well, you know what? We had a run at it, which was nice. So we had about a year and a half probably before the market went south. And so we had a chance to establish reputation, get some momentum behind us. The first year was amazing.
So if I step back a little bit, so tell us, obviously it's your surname, the Fosse Associates, and who was it? Just you? Did you build the team?
It was just me, really, my wife. We had 3 relatively young kids at the time, and and no income. And my wife helped me start it. She was in recruitment back in the day, so we used to have a joke that she was the finance director and used to check all the bills. We did. We just set it up together in our house in Sussex, and after about 6 months, made enough money to go, right, let's get some offices up in London. And I think then Linda separated a little bit from the business when it was clearly harder for her to kind of commute whilst we had young kids to look after as well.
What was the first 6 months like, you and your wife?
Just hectic, crazy time, exciting because we had a lot of business.
Wouldn't you have gone from, if you were on the board and exec committee at Harvey Nash, you'd have been so far removed from picking up the phone to candidates?
No, not really, actually. So I'd done a number of management jobs on the way through, but the last thing I did was I wanted to set up the CIO practice. So we were very much a mid-level recruiter, and I wanted to see if we could compete with search firms. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I just grew that. So I was quite hands-on. It was a small team, but doing very senior work.
Good training then, and
perfect,
great network.
Yeah, no, perfect in that respect. In hindsight,
So it brought you back down to earth, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, did you have a routine in the house when it was wife there, kids running around? That must have been a bit different.
The kids were mostly off at school. We had no pair, which was helpful as well. I just get up very early in the morning, go off to the study, and just get on with it. And just all hands to the pump. I had a few other people that I just knew that helped me out on a freelance basis, and quite soon we realised there was a real demand for what we were doing. And
what roles were you recruiting at the beginning?
First one ever was the global CIO for Bacardi, which was a really nice one to do, based out of Geneva. So, and in those days, this shows how long ago it was, we'd advertise that kind of stuff in the Sunday Times, in the appointment section. So, and the readership of the Sunday Times, the circulation is about 500,000. The readership's about 1.5 million. So you're out there with a brand name, with those kind of roles, really helped to establish our brand in a way that I think is harder now, actually. Yeah. So we were able to, by getting good senior roles.
Did you go straight for the CIO practice then at the beginning?
That was what I did. So that was what I knew most of all. And I had a strong network there, and people knew of me for that. So it was easy for them to decide to use me in that space. So that was, my name is synonymous with that. And so that was certainly the start. We started off as a search practice, and we grew it out from there. And there's only so much tech search work to do. And so logically, as we took more and more of the marketplace, we moved down, and from a client's perspective, we're able not just to put in the board level, but put in everybody under
the teams.
Put in the teams.
It makes sense if you're going to put a senior person in, then he's going to use your competition to fill his roles. It doesn't. It's not a nice feeling, is it?
It's a crazy idea, and it is strange because you see so many agencies that just concentrate on their lowest levels, and so many search firms that don't go down the full stack. But actually, you're offering a much better service to your client if you can do the whole lot.
You should partner up, shouldn't they?
Yeah,
rather than build it up.
I think they're very worried about. They see it as diluting their brand, but actually, if you do it well, it's enhancing your brand. I think the difficulty is for agencies working at quite a low level to move up the value chain, but quite a lot easier for search firms to move down. They just don't seem to have the appetite. They like doing the work they do, and they don't see the commercial opportunity, which suits me fine, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I imagine. So 6 months in, You decide, right, we've got some money in the bank, we've done some deals, let's go to London. Where did you head?
To shared office space at Piccadilly Circus, just above the Tube. Remember it very well. And we had tiny little office space for about 6 of us, just we really crammed the desks in. And we just started recruiting, mostly people that I'd worked with before or just knew of, or people that had come to me in some way, shape or form and heard about the business.
So when you got to London, it was like, right, headcount, let's start bringing some people.
Yeah, up to a point. And I think we got up to about 8 people just before things turned really sour, and which was tricky because we'd been growing quickly. If you think about it, we're just 18 months old, so we had a lot of headcount, but still a very young business with not much of a track record, and then suddenly the bottom falls out the market. So there's some interesting dynamics there. Can
you remember where you were when it all happened?
Not specifically, but I can certainly remember key moments when we were just aware that the business volumes just weren't there, and work that was in our pipeline wasn't coming through. And it just felt very, very dramatic. It was like -6% growth in 2009, and we got lucky to a certain extent. There were two clients that I'd known for years who really trusted me, and had big campaigns on. One of them was Birdseye, that had been bought by a private equity house called Permira from Unilever, and they bought the business out of Unilever, but they didn't buy any of the tech. And I knew the CIO there, and she just said, we're going to need to put in an entire European management infrastructure for the technology. So that really helped us. We did a great piece of work for her. Diageo used me a lot for their senior hiring as well. And then somebody who I knew quite well moved to the post office, Royal Mail, when Leighton and Crozier are just there, and wanted to completely redesign how the post office went about doing what it did. And he just called us in and said, look, I need to hire about 70 people in about 4 months. Can you help me?
This was in the tough times?
This was in the tough times.
Oh, yes.
I said, can you help me do that? And I said, we'll give it a good old go. Yeah. And that was quite a funny moment, because we were a tiny company at that point in time, and to deal with those volumes was extraordinary. And it was everybody from the CIO of a division, a CIO of a parcel force, all the way down to developers. So it was a real stretch for us. And I remember just as he was about to sign the contract, he looked up at me, and you could see it. That thought had just occurred to him, and he said, "You can do this, can't you?" And I went, "Yeah, of course we can, Robin." And thinking, we will do it. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how yet, but I know we'll do it. And it is an interesting thing, because looking back on it, that was all about trust, actually. Tanya Howarth from Birdseye, Robin Darg from Royal Mail, there was just a certain trust in that business relationship, which allowed them to take quite a leap of faith with us as a young business. And so I think there's a bit of a lesson there that comes back to roost at some point.
Yeah, well, you just struggled if you didn't have those relationships built previously, right?
And we really would have struggled. Yeah. And not even if we hadn't had those relationships, but I think we didn't have the degree of trust, because as a small business, we weren't a safe option in many respects.
But you personally must have been what they trusted.
Yes, but my ability to deliver was beyond what I was capable of delivering. So there was definitely a leap of faith as to the organisation.
They didn't go elsewhere for it. They didn't.
No, not in those two cases.
Wow.
No. But yeah, kept us out of trouble.
Did you keep hold of all 8 of the staff?
I think we lost one who relocated to Australia, I think, after a while, but yeah, no, it ended up being a busy time for us, and those 2 accounts were mostly Royal Mail and a few other bits and pieces. I remember there was a 6-month period where we were not making any money every single month. We were either losing a small amount or making a tiny amount, but it was pretty depressing, and we just stuck at it. We just carried on doing what we did as well as we could, and eventually the market got a little bit better. But yeah, salutary times. But they do say one of the best times to build a business is in a recession, because you're operating really well. You're operating really tightly. You have to.
You have to be at the top of your game.
Yeah, you have to be at the top of your game. And in a bull market, everybody looks great, right? And I think you can end up feeling that it's all about you because you're just being very successful, whereas actually it's more about the market. So we were a lean business, worked very hard for what we had, and as the economy picked up, just surfed that wave and continued growing rapidly the other side of it with a good reputation by that point that started to mean something, albeit it was still a really small team.
So we'll go back to that in a minute in terms of where you went after the recession and how that grew. But interesting, your background, obviously being such a senior person and been through quite a big deal, obviously before. Did you take that experience and then just run La Fosse without further guidance, or did you still feel like you needed like mentors or some kind of NEDs or anything when you started the business?
Yeah, I had all sorts of mentorship all the way along. I've always asked people for advice. Hopefully, been quite open, and I was always dealing with quite senior people as well, so that helped as well. But I did have, whilst it wasn't a strong operational sense of what to do, I had some really good, solid kind of guiding principles that had come through 20 years in recruitment. And the things I'd learned were really, really simple but powerful. And that was, if you treat people well from every perspective, not just your clients, that's a no-brainer, not just the candidates you're placing, but the 90% you're not placing, treat them well, and it comes back to you. Treat the people you work with as well as you can, and that comes back in spades as well. And that was the thing, really, was that underlying principle of everybody we work with, we treat really, really well as we can within the kind of commercial restraints that exist. And I think that set up a fairly distinct culture and reputation right from the start, and that's underpinned us, I think, all the way along. And if I had to put one thing at the heart of what's driven pretty consistent growth since we've been in existence, it is that simple thing. And the other thing that I really felt was important was this idea of co-ownership. So I'd been in an environment whereby I'd learned the hard way that if you don't hold equity in a company, then and it floats, then or you don't hold substantial amounts, then you're suddenly going to have a very rude awakening to the value that's being created. And a lot of people just don't realise what value is being created in an organisation alongside it growing. And as I say, I saw this company move from 30 people to a market cap of 250 million. And as far as I was concerned, I was left a bit out in the cold as far as that was concerned, relative to the contribution I'd made. And so I just thought, I don't want that feeling in another organisation. I want us all to be part of it, and for me to get a fair return for the risk and the contribution I've made. But that didn't, to me, feel like 95% of the company. It felt more like a 60% share of that would be good, which was lovely because it meant there was 40% to gift elsewhere, and we've gone on that journey. And I think it is important to people in terms of, if we do ever realise that value, that they'll share in it. But possibly even more importantly than that, it's just a nice statement, which is it's we're in this together. I'm sharing out. It's not just about bonuses and commission and that kind of thing. It's also the fundamental value that your good work is helping to create in the business is not all going into my back pocket. And I think that creates a much more positive and collegiate environment whereby people care a bit more about the company in terms of its reputation. They work a bit more collegiately with each other, and I think they just probably more enjoy coming into work because it feels like we're on the journey together.
Yeah, 100%. It's their business then, isn't it? More
yeah,
than just a job.
I think so.
So going back to coming out of the recession, what were you, 2 years old or so, 2 to 3 years old?
Yeah,
about 8 people, still in Piccadilly at that point?
Yeah, still in Piccadilly, moving from a bit bigger then, probably 10, 15 people. Right. And we just moved around Piccadilly, actually. So that was a shared office space. They kicked us out of there because they were redeveloping it. We went to Glasshouse Street, up into the attic there, grew to about 18 people there, took on some really key people at that point, or they turned out to be key people. So a guy called James Parker, who kind of joined us as a manager. Well, they can't have been that senior a manager because we didn't have that many people to manage. And he's now been the person who I promoted to managing director in time, and has become CEO. and another individual called Chris Chandler, who we took on in those very early days, who's still with us now, and not long after that, people like Dave Roberts, who again is one of the most senior people in the business, drives the majority of the profit of the business. He joined us as a graduate. So there's been a lot of people that have really been on the journey with us all the way through, which has given, I think, a kind of sense of the continuity of the culture and the values as well. That's really helped, albeit that the business seems unrecognisable almost from year to year because of the growth.
Yeah. So you tell me it's 35% year on year, which I imagine felt big in the early days, but 35% when you're big is even bigger. Because it's 35%.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because you're right, because if you're one person, you add another, that's 100% growth, right? Yeah. So yeah, we found actually it was very easy to get in the fastest times, 100 fastest growing companies for the first few years, and it's become a bit tricky after that. But you're right, the thing that really feels different now is that there are people in the business whose names I don't know, and who some of them I barely recognise, and some of those clearly I'll get to know over time, but the moment you're past 100, you can't clearly know everybody well, and the moment you're past 200, you're really struggling to know everybody, and so that I think is different, because I think a big part of the vibe is that it has felt like quite a close knit, friendly, harmonious group of people, and they know each other well, and clearly that piece has to go. It's already gone. They don't all know each other well now, and at the same time, as you want to keep that culture, you don't want it to become cliquey. So you've just got to accept that there's a different type of connection, different business. Hopefully, the values and what we stand for and what we do on a daily basis is the bond that pulls us together, rather than just the personal relationships.
So you're in that point now where you're 18 or so people, you're moving around, and you're going to go on a bit of a growth journey now. Well, you went on a growth journey. Can you remember when you started to put the infrastructure in place that it felt like a real business, where it wasn't just about making money and hiring heads, and it was about HR and finance and all the different elements that make up a real structure?
Yeah, there was no moment, I think, when we decided we had to do that. I think we were just growing in a fairly chaotic way, in some ways really just in a very organic way. We were being successful. We were making lots of profit, so we could reinvest it all in growth. And I remember at that time I think we had a part-time accountant who was there a couple of days a week. And you just end up suddenly realising you're stretching everything. So her name was Helen. She was brilliant, but she didn't want to work full time. So we got to the point where we said, we're going to need a full-time person. And so we suddenly got an FD, and that felt really grown up. But that was probably our first bit of real structure, was a full-time FD. And after that, that we didn't end up with somebody in HR or for quite a long time, actually, and even now we've got a very small HR department. It's mostly about learning development. That's the thing we get really excited about, is not the kind of centralized HR control piece, but how can we help people do what they do better, and that grew very rapidly once we'd established it, because a lot of our model is based on taking people who are relatively inexperienced in recruitment and really trying to teach them a good philosophy and a good way of doing things. So the training that sits behind that has become a really significant thing. So I think it was probably when we started to grow an internal learning and development function that we probably felt a bit more grown up.
What year was that? Can you remember?
I would say about 6 or 7 years ago. We were about 60 people strong.
So you went from potentially about 2009, 10, 20 people up to 60 in a couple of years then?
Yeah.
So that's a fast growth period.
Yes.
What would you put that down to?
It was just the organisation maturing, really. The market was still not going. The market hasn't ever gone crazy, really, since we've been in existence. I think we expanded geographically as well. So we went to Birmingham and up to Leeds as well. So that helped, but brought its own challenges as well, because suddenly your organisation is even more stretched than it was in terms of managerial competence. We even had an office in Mexico for a short period of time. We had a really good guy who was young and was working for us in the UK, and he said, I want to go back to Mexico. That's where he grew up. So we said, okay, well, how about we try and set up a business over there? And he went, yeah, great time. That was, God, that must have been 8-9 years ago.
Where in Mexico?
Mexico City.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a crazy place. I remember turning up there and trying to do business and finding people with machine guns in the car park and saying, are you sure this is safe? And he goes, oh yeah, it's safe because we've all got machine guns. It's like, yeah, okay. I'm not entirely convinced. And even the receptionist, actually, when you get up to the top of these very shiny buildings, even the receptionist was a man with a holster.
Wow.
So that was a funny old time. As it turned out, we operated there for about a year, and just couldn't get the traction we needed. And he was relatively young, couldn't really give him support from halfway around the world, and he went his own way, and we shut down the business.
How did the Birmingham, Leeds, and other locations? Did they all come about from individuals from London who wanted to go back home?
Helen, who's been with us for ages, just came to us and said, "I'd really like to work for you. I like the sound of what you're doing," and she's driven a lot of that growth and continues to work out of Leeds. So that was kind of accidental. We had somebody from London who said, "I want to grow a kind of outside of London business." A regional business, and we just gave him space and time to do that. As it turned out, probably a bit too much space, and it grew quite quickly. But again, I think we found it quite challenging to give it as coherent a feel from a kind of culture and a values perspective as we had in London, and that's a big lesson I've learned. I think is that at the moment you're geographically separating yourselves, you're really giving yourself more challenges than you realise. But
what was it? I think it was Russell Clements. I was at an event when he was talking about going international, and he was like, just get your operation right in your headquarters first before you even think.
Absolutely.
Like, just doubling the office numbers doesn't mean you grow. That means twice the problems. It's typically about 10 times the problems.
Yeah.
So as soon as you had 10 offices worldwide, you're probably adding 100 times more complexity to
you're so right. And Russell Clements was a very, very smart operator, and they did what they did brilliantly, and they really applied process and technology to what they did, and I learned a lot from just watching them actually in that regard. We're very different businesses in terms of how we culture and values. But in that regard, I think that they were super smart and tied everything down very, very tightly to make sure that they had replicatable processes. As you're right, so if you haven't got sound foundations, and that again is something we've really learned over time, you just don't even think about moving on because you're just building a pack of cards.
So what was that jump from 20 to 60 like? I know we're going back, but I'd say that is probably. My old business, when I was there, I was like number 7 and we got to 52 when I left, and we probably sat around 30 to 40 for a long time. That was a really difficult milestone, and I see that in the industry today when I talk to clients. It's like we're at 30 and then we can't kick on.
You're so right, and I think the difference is you can't get past 30 and 40 if you're still trying to run the business yourself on a day-to-day basis, and that's where the struggle happens, because you genuinely got to let go, as opposed to just thinking you're letting go a little bit. You really got to accept you don't know everything anymore. You don't know the client relationships, you don't know all the relationships inside the firm, and you're giving proper responsibility to people. And if you're a founder, that really hurts initially, because you're passionate about the business and you've made everything work so far through what you've been able to control. So you've suddenly got to accept or entertain the idea that it might be able to work without you controlling it or understanding it all, and that's a real leap of faith. And I think everybody goes through this painful process where they go from 40 up to 50, sometimes back to the 30, and it kind of moves around there. And I think for us, that 60 to 70 was the magic number, whereby we'd started to put a management team in place, or we'd put a management team in place, And then I could back off from that a little bit and just give them space and time to develop in their own way. And then what happened is, of course, you think, I've got that sorted now, I've got my management team in place, here we go. And then you find that different managers are performing at different speeds. So you've got this kind of two-tier nascent management team, and so you've got to make some tough decisions there, how to pull people back if they're not quite moving at speed, how to support the ones that are, but not let them get ahead of themselves. And I think I think if you can say, right, my job now is not to look at everything, not to keep on opening all the cupboards, but my job is to support those people and help develop them, then I think you'll go on pretty easily from 60 to 70, 80, 90, 100. And I think you can get up to probably, in that very simple way, 150 quite simply in that way. And then you've got another challenge, which is people are just not connected anymore in the same way. You know, there's a thing called Dunbar's number, which I think it's 120, after which you just can't know everybody.
No.
Yeah. And that was that. So then you've got to go, we've got to find processes, and most recruitment people, myself definitely in that category, not great on process. And so you've got to not just accept it, you've got to celebrate it, because you say, this is the way we're going to maintain the culture, this is the way we're going to carry on being successful, is if we're not trying to reinvent everything every day. But it is a struggle for as I say, the typical personality types you find in recruitment who aren't necessarily process oriented, but you know, with a maturing management team, we had a good FD in who was much more process oriented to help us understand that there can be beauty in process.
What about the sort of maturity and actual billing time for people? Because if you say you're bringing in, I know you had an organic model, because when we did as well, we used to compete with your guys a lot, and that, I think I was with Toby Babb last week from Harrington Star, one of our clients, and he was saying how they've gone from sort of 35 to 70-ish in about just over a year and a bit. And the biggest challenge they're facing is they haven't got enough people that have been in the business for 12 months and 2 years. And it's that. So there's a lack of maturity, but it's smaller. And I used to call it the underbelly, when you had so many juniors underneath a few. Yeah. Did you find that was a challenge?
It was a huge challenge. And looking back on it, that was a big mistake. It wasn't a big mistake. It was, in hindsight, a tough time for us, and it was 2016. We went from 100 to 150, and although we're adding more numbers these days, 100 to 150 is really significant because it was 50% increase. And and at that point, our managers were mostly homegrown, so they were quite inexperienced, really good, really high potential people. They just hadn't gone through that cycle, and so suddenly we had a bunch of new people in the business who we were really committed to, in terms of we want to help you the best we can. We want to make sure you develop in a way that allows you to accelerate as quickly as possible. We want to be true to our culture and our values all the way along. But we had a bunch of young managers just inexperienced and overrun with business. Still a lot of kind of player managers at the same time. And if I'm really honest, I think then we probably didn't deliver as well as we would have liked to on our promise to people coming into the business, and we saw a high rate of turnover as a consequence of that, and people who had joined us because they'd heard such good things about the culture and the values of the company, I think felt actually this is not as nurturing as I was led to believe. And that wasn't because we couldn't be bothered, it was because we'd got to the limit of our competence. So I think our learning there was 50% growth, annual growth is just beyond us. We were lucky enough to be commercially successful to be able to afford it, but it had gone beyond our competence at that point in time. Learned an important lesson, and since then we've gone for about 30-35% growth every year, and that's still aggressive, and it's still stretching us all, and for our managers it still means they have to grow very quickly, but it's doable, and I'd like to feel we still have the kind of we learned from going to 150. The culture ended up wobbling a little bit. We got it back on track.
So tell me a bit more about that. So a bit more elaborate on that culture wobbling. What does that mean, and what actually happened? It was
as simple as people were not being as looked after, as nurtured as was important to us, and we were getting that feedback. and it felt fundamentally wrong for us as a business. We'd set ourselves out on that basis, and we weren't delivering to it. It's difficult to recognise it and deal with it because we had these people, and
you say to people, don't you, like, especially when you've got quite a rigorous interview process and you're making people come back 1, 2, 3 times, you're saying, look, if we can commit, we're going to commit to you if you get it. We've got such a selection process. Once you're in, you're in.
Yep.
And if you don't then put your side of the bargain, it's just not fair.
No, it's not. And as I say, we learned from that, and I think we also proved that a culture, you can lose a little bit of the culture, but if you really care about it and you want to keep it the way it should be, you can bring it back, and that. So we learned a lot through that, and as a consequence, in 2017, I think we did not grow at all. We just said we're not going to grow anymore. We're just going to consolidate. We're going to let ourselves, in terms of managerial competence, catch up with it. And we're going to be the best we can for the people that are coming through, and we did that.
You just hired to replace rather?
We hired to replace, and we didn't even do that. We ended up 140 at the end of the year, so we lost 10 over that time. And but we were really comfortable with that. And in fact, interestingly, during that period, we trebled our profits because we weren't investing in headcount, and everybody had got a year's more experience.
Sure.
So it made a big difference.
Sure. So beyond that, so 2017, hang on, we can just edit. Thomas, we'll just edit that bit out.
Yeah.
Because he's knocking on there. If you hear a knock again, just let him in.
That chisel could be interesting if he carries on.
No,
we'll see.
Outside. Don't worry, we'll carry on.
Yeah.
So you said 2017, you sat with 140, and you're now at 215.
Yes.
That is, again, pretty impressive. Incredible, actually, in 2 years. So tell us a bit more about, you've had that year where you've consolidated, you've dropped back a little bit. What happened next?
I think we felt absolutely ready to go again, and also we found that by that time to your point, always you said early on, I think most people know the name. For me, we still think ourselves as a startup, and I'm always surprised when people go, oh yeah, LaFosse, we know about them, because we think of ourselves as I say, this kind of small high growth company. But I think you're right. I think we started to get by that time enough critical mass, both in terms of the number of people calling out and the amount of work we were doing, and the time we've been in existence, for that growth to become much more natural. And the consequence of being very value driven in terms of how we recruit meant that a lot of business was coming back to us. A lot of candidates who were dismayed with how they were being treated by the rest of the industry felt we were dealing with them in a fundamentally different way, and guess what, they get jobs and they recommend us, and the clients again got a strong sense of what we were doing and continue to recommend us, and we deliver a quality product. So if we take a job on, we fill it, and we fill it in a high integrity way, and that all counts for something. And so I think what we found is increasingly the kind of flywheel effect has taken over. The other thing we do as a business, which we're really passionate about, is we reward everybody that cross-sell it. So it isn't just expecting people to introduce people to other accounts. If they do, there's a financial reward for it. And the consequence of that is that over half the business that we do has been referred from somebody else in the business to somebody else. So that, and I think part of that is to do with it being a co-owned culture as well. So they're just much more likely to try and get somebody else in the business who's in a different area, maybe working at a different level in a different technical vertical. They're just trying to get them into an account that they've developed. Mm-hmm. And so that is a really helpful accelerant to growth.
Tell me more about the co-owned business product. I mean, when did you come up with the structure, and how does it work?
Of co-ownership?
Yeah.
Right from the start. In fact, it was a funny old thing, because you feel very vulnerable, as I said, when you've resigned from your job and you have no business to talk of, really.
I know that feeling.
No, yeah. And I met a few advisors, some lawyers, to get our contracts sorted, and accountants to basically advise us on how to set up the legal structures. And they said, how do you want to organise the equity? And I said, I'd like to do it like this. And they said, 40%, why are you giving away 40%? I just said, because I want it to be a collegiate organisation. I want us to be doing it together. I want everybody to benefit from it, and I want that energy in the business as a consequence of that. And they said, no, I appreciate all that. It's really nice, but you don't want to give away the equity. That's the real value in the company. I said, look, no, I do understand that academically, and I do want to do it. And I really had to stick by my commitment, by that conviction at that point. It was difficult because, as I say, lawyers and accountants, you kind of go, these guys are setting up businesses all the time. They know what they're talking about. Am I sure I've got this right? And I just hung on to that idea. And as I say, I think it's been the fundamental building block to our success. So I'm pleased I did.
Well, I think it has to be. I think one of the big things in recruitment is share schemes, EMI schemes, but there's lots of stories of it being a bit of a smoke and mirrors type scenario where, golden handcuff, and it doesn't necessarily amount to anything. But how does it work? Do you give it to everyone, or is it when they reach a certain level of management, or is there a structure?
So everybody, from a graduate when they sign a contract with us, will get a share option allocation. So it's not shares, it's not equity. So if they leave, they don't keep it, but it's share options. The receptionist, the same again. We're all in it together. Clearly differing amounts depending on the time you've been there and the value you're contributing, but that principle of everybody having a slice of it is important. And it has no value until at such point that we realise some value from it, either by selling the company or by floating it, or getting some kind of private equity investment. And all of those things are possible in the future, but there are no immediate plans to do it, because to a certain extent it signals the change of a journey and not exactly a destination. And we're enjoying what we're doing at the moment. So I think some people feel there's a bit of ambiguity. What does this mean to me? If I leave the company tomorrow and I've been here for 5 years, will I take any equity away with me? And the answer to that is no. But what I can guarantee is at the point at which there is some value realization, that maybe 5 years from now, maybe 15 years from now, it may be that we become a public company and you just trade your shares. But whatever happens at the point there is some kind of event, I can tell you for sure that the 40% of the value of that company will be paid to the people in that organization at that point in time. And that's the only guarantee I can give you. And I'm really comfortable with that. And I think it should be the people that have helped drive the company forward and that are still there at that point in time.
You get a lot of questions now, though, about the future and when and how and...
Not that many, because I think because it's 40%, it's actually spread very thinly because there's 200 odd people. Yeah. So for the majority of the people here right now, it doesn't mean, it's symbolic more than anything. If we had an event now, it wouldn't be more than I don't think a couple of thousand for people that have just joined. And that's as much as it should be. And I think for the senior people, they're smart enough to know that if we're growing at 30% per annum, then the stake of their stake is growing at 30%, and there's aren't many investments that they could drive comparable value out of. So they're happy just to stay there, going, come on, let's keep on driving it. Every year we're here and we're growing it by 30%. We're growing our stake by that amount. So there's a very healthy dynamic there. I think if it wasn't such a happy place to work, that would probably be different. I think it'd be more likely to have people kind of going, come on, I want to get out. I've done my time here. How can I make something out of this? So I think there's a very real responsibility on us to make sure that it continues to have a real positive feeling to the place.
Sure. So tell me more about the situation and the reasons, dynamics as to why you stepped out of the CEO position into a chairman's role and replaced yourself. What went on there?
I think a number of things. Firstly, I felt James could actually do a better job as CEO than me. And so that's an important tick in the box.
What was he demonstrating that made you think that?
Just a very organised, smart, process-driven person with more energy than I have, I think, at this point. He's early 40s, I'm early 50s, and you get that sense that you slow down over time. Really passionate about the business, so thinks about it in a very similar way culturally to me. So it felt like a safe pair of hands. And also we're trying to bring everybody up through the business. So if you kind of stop that progress at the top of the organisation, it's going to reverb down the organisation, and we're trying to create leaders all through the organisation. So the more headspace I can give people underneath me, the more headspace they can give their people, and the faster they'll develop. So there's a certain logic there. Having said that, is it difficult letting go of the train set? For sure. For sure it is. And every now and again I grab it back.
When was it? When did you make the decision?
Nearly 2 years ago. And it's still a transitional thing. And we sit down, we spend a lot of time together talking stuff through. But the nice thing is there's two of us debating stuff. So, they say being CEO is a lonely place. But I think because I'm sitting in the background, he's got that, there's that ability for him to just to bounce ideas off me, and the same for me with him. I'll have some harebrained idea that I think's a great idea one day, and it's only when I talk it through with James and he goes, well, have you thought about this, and what about the ramifications here, I kind of go, oh yeah, no, maybe not such a smart idea. And so I think there's that's a really helpful dynamic. And it's predicated upon having a really strong working relationship, which doesn't mean to say there's not any tension there. There is often, and because we both care passionately about what we do, and we don't think in exactly the same way. But I think it's a healthy check and balance, and because we work together for so long, over so many years, we know each other really well. So there's no surprises there. And I think one of the most important things is that right from the start, James just had implicit trust in me, and that in itself creates an environment whereby you feel you have to reward that trust by being trustworthy. And so I think from the start we've had a very effective business relationship where we have just assumed that we are both coming at it from exactly the right perspective, doing what's right for the company as opposed to thinking about just our own careers.
Amazing. What does that mean for the role? So how would you draw the line now? What does he? I know what a CEO is responsible for, but where do you come in, and what are you day to day looking to?
It's probably looser than it should be. So if you looked at official responsibility split between a chairman, an exec chairman, and a CEO, you'd probably find I dive in a little bit too much.
Alex Ferguson.
I don't know.
Still making the calls in the background.
But you do that too much, and what's the point in having a CEO? And you're not going to have a CEO for long. So I see things from a different angle. We have different strengths, and I think we both appreciate what those strengths are. So sometimes I'll go to him because I know he's going to make a better decision, or he'll manage something through much better than I would. And at other times, if James isn't sure about something, he'll kind of come to me and say, what do you think? And so I think by and large it's a really healthy relationship, but I'd be a liar if I said I was always in the chairman box and James was always in the CEO box. I think if you look at it over the last 2 years, James is taking much more CEO control than he did at the start, and you could say, well, that's a healthy thing. You don't want to go cold turkey initially. Yeah. It's a natural. So there's an ongoing transition there. And every 6 months, I kind of look at James's journey and I say, yeah, he's much more in that seat now, and allowing me to take a back seat, and which is really rewarding, because there's so much going on and so much opportunity in the marketplace that if I'm in the day to day, I'm doing the same job as James and I'm interfering with what he's doing, but I'm not thinking about the important things, which is, should we be developing a business in a new marketplace? Should we be thinking seriously about a new business stream? And all of those things. That's as important for me to be thinking and have the headspace to be doing those things as chairman as it is for James to be driving the operational excellence, every day of the week.
So how do you spend your days now? Is it always in the office, or is it mixed?
Yeah, mostly in the office. I take a lot of holiday, if I'm really honest with you. So I love skiing, and I went on a good few ski trips last year, and we bought a place out in Greece. So I'll be spending in Xanthi, Zakynthos.
Oh, I've been there years ago.
Yeah.
Not for the sort of holiday you'd want to go on right now, but neither do I either.
But so that's nice, and I'll be spending 3 weeks there in June, and a bit of time in September. And so when I'm back, I'm pretty much full time in the business. it does mean that I can take some time out, and
it's good headspace as well.
It's a really good headspace, actually.
And James Kahn, who said, we ran an event with him last year, and he was saying how he lives in Monaco and all the rest of it. He's got this place, I don't know where he said it was, but it wasn't too fancy, but it was just a place where like he had no connection. Yeah. And it was his headspace. He said he goes there like every 3 to 4 weeks and just even has one day and he feels better about it. I think it's important, especially when you've been in the London push and drive for so long. I'm getting married in this month, so I'm going.
Congratulations!
Thank you. I'm going to Mykonos and Santorini for my honeymoon,
which is a brilliant place to go.
Yeah, I've never been, but wow, the price was frightening, actually frightening. But it's going to be beautiful. I'm going to Ibiza this Friday with 17 of my mates from my stag do.
That'll be quiet.
So if this episode is my last,
we know why.
Yeah, then maybe this will go down as like some kind of famous episode. The last time Sean Anderson spoke on online, but
never to be seen again.
Yeah, well, I'm just genuinely scared. I'm actually apprehensive. Like 2.5 years since we started this business, I've had a couple of trips. Like I went to Thailand for Christmas. My brother lives over there, but this is different because you're going to get pelted by 17 lads, and then we're at a really critical point in the business as well. We're really going for it right now, and there's so much stuff we're doing, and it's brilliant. And I'm loving it, and it's like probably the next 6 weeks is a write-off after this week.
But again, you should enjoy it. Just take that time, accept it is what it's going to be. And just accept it, and then you'll be able to enjoy it, right? Which you should do. I mean, those are seminal moments, right, in your life. You've got to give them the attention and the space they deserve, and everything else is secondary suddenly.
So you go, spend time in skiing, spend time in Greece, and the rest of the time is in the business with the family.
Pretty much.
And how is the wife still not involved slightly in the finances anymore? Or?
No, as little as possible. We had a joke about her being the finance director, being too controlling on the finance front. When do you know Jonathan Palmer? He does these race days, and they're about $1,000 per person. And we took about, when we were just probably about a year old, we took about 8 clients and about 8 of us, and so it's 16, and we just thought it'd be a good investment, and it would be a laugh as well. Got to be honest. But it was just a great way to spend a day with clients, and as a thank you for the business they've given us. And anyway, I asked them to invoice me, and they said, "Well, we'll send you an invoice before and an invoice afterwards." I said 50-50. I said, "Yeah, that's fine." Anyway, this invoice comes through for $8,000, and Linda looks at it and goes, "What the hell is this?" I go, "Oh, darling, that's it's just a day. It's a day, on a racetrack. It's going to be really good. Lots of clients coming along." She said, "Well, it's outrageous, £8,000." I said, "Yeah, it is quite a lot of money." And I was thinking, she hasn't seen the other 8 yet, and so all hell broke loose then. But joking aside, it was really helpful in those early days. One, just another pair of hands, and somebody who, and also to understand what I was going through, and just to be in it together. It was a lovely time, actually, although it was pretty hairy. And
how did you manage the next 12 years or 10 years or so when you're going through this mental amount of growth? And I imagine you had setbacks and issues. I can only compare to what I go through. Yeah. But you've got young children. You say 3 young kids at home? Yeah, well, they're not so young anymore. They're 2 have left university. One's about to go. So right, but you would have been at the critical moments when they're at high school, etc. Yeah. How did you find that?
It was tough. It was tough actually. I mean, they boarded pretty much all 3 of them weekly boarded, so they were back at the weekend, but they were away during the week, so that gave us at least a headspace there, and they did that because that was what they wanted to do. But I still remember when the business was very young, I'd take them to rugby on a Sunday, and so they play with their school on a Saturday, and then on the Sunday they'd go and play club rugby. And I do remember then kind of using the hour that they'd be playing rugby to sit there emailing, and you could just see some of the dads looking at me going, "What a saddo, what a saddo. Yeah, he should be enjoying this time with his kids." And I was, but I look back on that and go, I was there with them in the car on the way up and on the way back, and a lot of the time I'd be watching the game as well. But it also just gave me that little bit of extra time sometimes.
I think there's an element of sacrifice that you've just got to deal with when you're trying to run a business and grow something as substantial as you have. That you can't be perfect in every part of it.
No. And I think, I was generally quite good at making the school plays and seeing them, and then the competitions and playing sport. But if I'm really honest, I think that I wasn't always entirely present.
Yeah.
At the weekend. Yeah, definitely mentally at the weekend.
That's my biggest problem is vacancy in the head.
Yeah, vacancy.
I'll be there.
Well, it's a male problem, isn't it, in general, really? But no, and I think that is because that was the difference. When I was busy at work before it was on my own business, I'd be crazy during the week, but the weekend I would switch off, and I've never really switched off since then, because it just doesn't seem to leave your head. No. But now we're not fighting. It doesn't feel like we're fighting for survival. Now it's a good big business with a great leadership team in place. The musing at the weekend is exactly that, rather than, oh my God, kind of thinking about it. You're still engaged, and it's a lovely thing in a way. It's lovely to have that interest and that level of engagement. But you're absolutely right. You've got to make sure you've still got the space for the really important things in life, like your partner, your kids, and your friends, and your relations.
Definitely. So we're wrapping up in 5-10 minutes. Got a few questions. One is where you're heading. So we've talked about where you are. We've really gone into detail, and you've talked a bit about that there's got to be some kind of event in the future at some point, but there's no clarity. But what's the kind of immediate to medium term future for La Fosse and yourself?
I think I'm really excited about getting us to 500 people and that journey, because I think there's a management team, there's a leadership team in place, there's a reputation, there's an infrastructure, there's the market dynamics are all there for that to happen relatively quickly, and that would be really exciting, because we're a medium-sized company now, and to be a company of 500 people predominantly in tech in the UK would suddenly feel quite market dominant, and so I see that as the next milestone. After that, I think I will be asking the management team what they want to do, and if they've had enough of each other by that time and they want to move on, then it will be we'll have some kind of value creation. But if I'm really open about it, I think my preference would be for them to turn around in 5 years' time to me and say, we'd like to take this company public, or maybe we'd like to keep it private, but we need to do something with this 40%, so that needs to become dividend bearing every year, and it's like a profit share. It's not dissimilar to the stuff that John Lewis do, but I'd like to feel that they would want to take it on. But it will be them. It won't be me. I'd like to feel that I'll be there as a chairman in the background as long as they need me. But ultimately, it is about what they want to do, and if they find it exciting enough and rewarding enough, I'd like to think they want to keep going. That's a frequent complaint, isn't it, in the UK, is we get our businesses to a certain size and then we sell them. Michael Page, Rob Waters, Randstad, I don't know if those are good examples, but certainly Page and Rob Waters, why they didn't feel a need to sell. And they're both continuing on a journey, I think, quite excited about what they're doing as an organisation. So there's no reason why that can't apply to us. But there is a point which is, there's 40% of the company is out, then that has created a certain set of expectations. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to produce the end of the company, and that's an important one to try and work through. But I think we probably can.
Love it. And if we're going to look back, what would you say? Give us a moment that you would look back on and go, I made a mistake there. I wish I'd not done that.
Well, there's loads of those. I think certainly some of the key hires I've made, I think I should have spent more time with people. I've certainly needed... it's a funny old thing, coaching is a really easy style to talk about, but I still don't coach enough. And I think so I'll come into a situation and I'll start drawing conclusions without understanding it enough. So that's an embarrassing thing to say, but it's an ongoing mistake that I keep on making, because I've got this set of experience that makes me think I probably know what the answer is a lot of the time. And a lot of the time, actually, what I just need to do is find out what's going on, and then ask somebody else for their opinion, because generally they've got it right. And so that's partly about slowing down. I think other mistakes I made, too many to mention. I've got a terrible memory, so I make a lot of mistakes just based on not remembering stuff. Actually,
what are you most proud of? Let's move to something positive.
What am I most?
You look back now. What one thing are you most proud of?
The fact that every year, I think for the last 6 or 7 years, we've been one of the top 20 or 30 companies to work for in the UK in terms of people just enjoying working there. And you spend 5 days out of 7 at work. You spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your loved ones. If you can create an environment that people want to come to and enjoying being there, not only are you going to have a really efficient business, you're going to be fundamentally affecting the human experience of a bunch of young people developing their careers. And that, for me, that's the most rewarding thing, is that we're creating an environment that people want to be a part of, enjoy working in, and whose careers are really accelerating partially as a result of that. And that, without a shadow of a doubt, is the most rewarding thing for me.
Amazing, I love that. And finally, this podcast is designed to help the owners that are in the thick of growth right now, maybe the first couple of years, and they're going through those really early moments, and they don't necessarily have other owners surrounding them to support them, or actually the people that haven't even started yet. So I look back to 2015-16 when I was planning my business, and I couldn't really talk to my bosses about it because I was going to start my own, and I didn't know any business owners. I didn't have anyone around me that I could lean on, and I really wish something like this existed right there. Back then. 'Cause that was the moment in my life when I started 2015-16. I think I started listening to podcasts, and I thought it was like that would be the best job ever to have a podcast. I thought you got paid for them, which you don't unless you're like got millions of listeners. But if we're going to go back to those people now, and you're going to pick, let's just take someone who's in the first year or two of their business, because I know loads of people listen at that level. What advice would you give them if they what 1-2 things could you say to them in those early days they must do to keep moving forward?
I think one of the important things is to realise that nobody came into work wanting to do a bad job. So that sometimes when you don't have the same degree, when the people around you don't have the same degree of drive or necessarily natural aptitude or just experience at that level, you just need to be sympathetic to that and accept that they are doing the best they can, and that it's your job to support them in that, as opposed to berate them. And that's a subtle but important change, I think, which is assume they are trying to do the best they possibly can with all the right intentions, because they probably are. And I think all too often in that kind of sense of a panic sometimes that you have as a young business owner, you feel that you can't give people the latitude that you should be. 1, because they're not going to develop otherwise, and 2, they're not going to enjoy the job, and 3, they might just surprise you and do it better than you do.
Yeah, I think some people fear that. Well, look, thanks so much. I personally have really enjoyed it, and I hope the listeners have. If anyone would like to reach out and ask you any questions directly, are you happy for that?
Yeah, fine. Yeah. Grab me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, the best place, yeah. So Simon, I'll tag you in all the posts anyway. So that's it, guys. That's the story of Fosse Associates, and Simon's quite happy for you to reach out to him, drop him any notes. Likewise, if you've got any questions for me, anything you want me to ask future episodes or future guests, then please do get in touch. Finally, I always end the show by saying, look, we want to make this the podcast that recruitment owners and aspiring owners around the world are listening to. I already know we've got a global listener base, but I want this to reach more and more people. So there's a few things I'd like you to do is, firstly, if you're listening on the iTunes store, give us a 5-star rating, put some comments in there. That always helps promote the podcast further on that platform. And if you're listening on our website or through Spotify and you're seeing the post that we're putting about the episodes on LinkedIn, then please do grab, share, add comments. Make sure that the other people in your network are listening to this podcast as well, because we want to help as many people as possible. That's it for this week's episode of The Rag. Next week, I'll be joined by another guest, providing I don't die in Ibiza. Speak to you then.